In this tutorial, we're going to go over how to create a drawing in Fusion 360, and we're going to be using the Titan 10M as our model. Let's first take a look at the Titans of CNC drawings, and this will give us a better understanding of what our drawing will look like. On sheet number 1 here, we have the outside geometry of our part, and we also have some radii. Sheet number 2, we've got these bosses and their locations. Sheet number 3, we've got these counterbore holes. We have these tapped holes. We also have these polygons, which make up the features of our honeycombs. Looking at our front view here, we have a cutaway, and we are ready to go. Let's jump into Fusion 360 and create our drawing. I'm over here in Fusion 360 now, and I already have the Titan 10M loaded. The very first thing that we need to do is we need to create some reference geometry that we can import in to our drawing workspace. As you can see in my sketches, I've changed some of the names of my sketches here so I can better find them. The two sketches we are going to be looking for are the profile sketch that cuts our part away, and then our polygon sketch, which creates that honeycomb feature. We're going to create two new sketches though, because I don't want all that geometry, I just want a portion of it. So I'm going to go to Create and down to Create Sketch. We're going to click on the front part here. I'm going to come over to my sketches and turn on my profile sketch, and I'm going to project, so P on the keyboard, some geometry. The geometry I'm going to project is this line right here, and this vertical line, and then press OK. Once you have that geometry in place, we're going to turn off our profile sketch. And what we're going to do is we're going to create some new lines in here, L on the keyboard. We're going to draw a line in. This line, we want it to go all the way across the part, and then we want it to terminate into this endpoint. We want to add a relationship to this line. We want to say it's perfectly horizontal. So we're going to add in that horizontal constraint, just like that. We're going to finish our sketch here. And then I'm going to rename this sketch by slowly double clicking on sketch 13. And I'm going to label this as profile drawing and then enter to lock it in. I'm going to turn the visibility of it off so I can work on my next sketch. My next sketch, I'm going to have to create a construction plane on because the top of our part here is cut away at an angle. So I'm going to go to Construct, down to Offset Plane. I'm going to click on the very bottom of my bosses, and then I'm going to type in a measurement of -876 thousandths, which is the top of our part, and then press Enter. Now that I have a construction plane here, I can create a new sketch. So P on the keyboard for project. We're going to click on this sketch here. And then we're going to turn our polygon sketches on. The geometry I'm after in this sketch is going to be the geometry that makes up this polygon, including the cross lines. So I'm just clicking on those lines here, but I'm not clicking on the center line because that center line goes all the way through the part. Notice if I turn my body off, this is the geometry I have chosen. Afterwards, I'm going to press OK in the pop-up window. And then I'm going to turn off my polygon sketch. And I'm going to add in that missing center line and finish my sketch. I'm going to label this sketch as polygon. Oops. Drawing. That way I can reference it in our drawing workspace. We're ready to move into our drawing workspace. First thing you have to do is save your part. And then we're ready to change our workspace, going down to drawing from design. In our pop-up window, it's asking, do you want everything in the modeling workspace to be a part of your drawing? Yes, we do. We are creating a new drawing. The template that we're going to be using is a template that we created in another video. And then we're going to press OK. The very first view that we're going to be landing is our front view. The thing is if you look at our view, our scale is very small. So I'm going to change our scale to 1:1, which will make it a lot easier for us to see it. And I'm going to land our front view right about here, and then press OK. Now that we have our front view in place, we're going to add in our top view, going up to our toolbar and to projected view. We're going to click on our front view here, dragging up our front view, or excuse me, our top view. And then I'm going to move my mouse to the side, giving us an isometric view, and then press enter on the keyboard to lock into place. I'm going to change our isometric view from a wireframe into a shaded part. So I'm going to go shaded with visible edges, and then I'm going to close that out. I'm going to rotate our isometric view around so I can better fit it into our sheet here. So I'm going to go to modify down to rotate. I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to go up to transform and choose a location. And I'm going to drag my mouse around. You have to be kind of patient with this. Fusion 360 is trying to come up with this like a wireframe preview for you. And that's looking pretty good. And then press OK. I'm going to move my isometric view down and onto our sheet. Now that we have our 3 views present, we're going to come over to our browser window and open up our sketches. We're going to turn the primary vision of sketches on, and then we're going to turn on the visibility of our profile and our polygon drawing sketches. And as you can see, as soon as Fusion 360 updates, our sketches that we created before we left our design workspace are now visible. We're going to take a look at our front view first. We're going to come up to dimensions and down to ordinate dimensions. We're going to land our datum location right on the top of our sketch that we created. We're going to land our 0 here and then our 0 at this location. I'm going to drag this down a little bit to kind of even them up. One thing I am going to change, I'm going to go down to the bottom center where it says annotation settings. I'm going to turn on display trailing zeros, and then I'm going to change my linear dimension precision to the thousandths column. With that in mind, Notice my 0 location has the 3 trailing zeros here. I'm going to double click on it and change their primary precision to read just 0. Now that we have our datum landed, we're going to add in some of our measurements. We're going to go back to ordinate dimensions. And we're going to take a look at our vertical measurements first. I'm going to come zooming in, and we have our sketch that we created before we left the design workspace. And I'm going to reference off of that tip of those intersections and drag my mouse over. Then I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to reference off of this tip here, which is the outside of our part. Be mindful you're not clicking on where the chamfer was located. I'm going to go off of the bottom of our pocket, again referencing off of the end of our extension lines, and then the bottom of our part. And then lastly, the bottom of our bosses. Now that we have those dimensions in, we're going to add in our horizontal dimensions. Same thing, we're going to reference back to that intersection point, referencing off of our extension lines. Then we're going to come over to this area, and same thing, we're going to reference off of this theoretical location. Unfortunately, we don't have a line here, so what we're going to do is we're going to find the endpoints of the arc here, and then we're going to move our mouse here, and you can see we have those green lines that kind of form that intersection point. I'm going to click on it, and then again referencing off of our last extension line, and looks like we got a small error. If you're coming up with an error, make sure you address those. Generally, Fusion 360 is correct on all these errors. So let's come in, let's find that arc again. There we go, that's better. And then lastly, we're going to come off of the end of our part, and I'm going to put a little bit of a bend in this one. I'm going to adjust this one and put a bend in here too. We do have another measurement coming off of this side. Now I could reference it on the other side, but the issue is our extension line is going to pass all the way through our part, and that could be a little bit harder to read. So I'm going to go back to ordinate dimensions, and I'm going to reference off of that. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Off of this tip of where the cutaway was, and I'm coming right off of the front line, and we'll drop this down like so. Now that we have our dimensions in place, we're going to add a couple other dimensions. We're going to go to D on the keyboard. The one dimension that we are going to add in here is this radius. I'm going to click on it and drag my mouse up. and then press OK. There are two features, so I'm going to type in 2x, that share that radius. In addition to that, we have the diameter of our boss. So we're going to go back to dimensions, or D on the keyboard, and I'm going to draw down the diameter of my boss. And I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to insert the diameter symbol so you realize that that is a circle. And then I'm also going to put the indicator in there that there are 3 that share that dimension. Looks like our front view is pretty much done. The only thing I dislike right now is my measurements are really close to the edge. I'm going to click on my front view and just kind of nudge that over a little bit. The only other thing that we're missing out of this is we need to call out our hole locations. I'm going to go to text with the leader, and I'm going to click on this area here, kind of in the center where our holes are. And I'm going to type this note in. There are 7 1032 unified find class 2B threads. We want these to go down 500 thousandths minimum. We'll insert the GD&T symbol for depth. Oops. And then our hole, I'm going to type hole in, has a diameter. We're going to insert the diameter symbol. And that is 177 2/10. And that needs to go through the part. And we'll close that out. After you type your note in, we can move this around and kind of reorganize the workspace. Our front view is done now. What we're going to do is we're going to come up and start dimensioning our top view. We're going to go back to ordinate dimension. We're going to reference off of the endpoint of our arc here. And then the front of our part. Oops. You zoom in there a little bit better. And then we're going to find the intersection point there. Okay, we have our datum landed. Now we're going to come back and add in our other measurements. What we can do is we can come in and reference off of the extension lines here. That way everything lines up exactly. I'm going to change the primary precision of these to 0. And we're ready to add in our ordinate dimensions. Very first dimension we're going to reference off of is the center of this bolt hole. We're going to add that in. The next dimension is this theoretical point here off of our arc. May have to zoom in a little bit more. There's our theoretical point. Moving off of that. The center of this hole. This is our counterbore hole. The center of our holes running down the center. Center again of the counterbore hole. this theoretical point here from this arc. We may have to zoom in a little bit more. There's our point. The hole's going across the bottom. And then the bottom of our part. Now that we have our vertical dimensions labeled, we're going to come in and add our horizontal dimensions. First, coming off our bolt hole here. Then we're going to come off of these bolt holes. Again, I'm referencing off of the previous extension line, so everything kind of lines up on our print. Once you get accustomed to Fusion, you can actually knock out a blueprint fairly quick. You just have to understand kind of its little nuances there. Now that we have our linear dimensions in, we're missing two horizontal measurements. And the horizontal measurements that we're missing is this theoretical point here. We may be able to capture it right now off the arc. So there's our one point here. And then we're going to locate this one, same exact way. We're going to zoom really far in. We're going to find the endpoints of our arc. And we have this endpoint here. If you are coming up with any type of errors, I highly suggest to address those. So notice we're getting a little bit of an error here. Fusion 360 is actually pretty accurate if you misclick some geometry. So let's go back and try to fix that geometry here. So here's my endpoint. Here's my radius. And I think we're still too far off. My endpoint. And my other endpoint. And this one we're having a little bit of an issue with. That's okay. You know, if you are having an issue with landing something like this, you can always go in and add in some geometry that will help locate that for you. Let's try this location and see if this works. Notice we're still getting that warning So what we're going to do is we're going to delete this one. We're going to add in an edge extension. We're going to click on this line here and this line here, and then that will give us a location to snap to. And now we have no warning. Now that we have our horizontal measurements in, we're going to add in some of our other dimensions. So D on the keyboard enters us into dimension mode. I'm going to reference off of this polygon here. And I'm going to click on the edge of our polygon and then the edge of our part. And I'm going to drag my mouse in between these lines and then land that measurement there. While I'm here, I'm going to add in this radius here. I'm going to drag my mouse over, adding in our radius. The bottom of our polygon, we're going to go from point to point. The web over here, we're going to click on both sides of the web, drag our measurement down. This one I'm going to readjust and bring my leader line onto the other side. We have another web thickness. I'm going to click on this triangle over here and position that pretty much in the center. We have a radius on the outside. We have this web thickness here. And then we have this web thickness. And then lastly, we're going to come off that radius there and add that in. Once I got my measurements in place, all I'm going to do is come back into them and type in the quantities. There are 12 features that share this particular radius. On this web thickness, that entire web going down the center of our part is all the same thing. So I'm going to type in TYP at the end, indicating the whole web is typical. Our dimension down here of 140 thousandths for this web thickness. There are 4 instances of that, so I'm going to put a 4x in there. The radius here, there are 4 instances of that radius. I'm going to close that out. This dimension of our web here on the bottom of our part, there are 2 of those features on here. So we're going to type in a 2x here and then close that out. And then I'm going to change this 80 thousandths to typical, meaning that the webs for that polygon is all 80 thousandths. Going back to our radius up top, I'm going to add a typical in there. And I'll realign this. And we're getting pretty close to the end. We're going to add in some geometry here. We're going to add in some center marks on our counterbore holes. We could also add these center marks on our drilled and tapped holes. It's not really necessary though. Lastly, we're going to add in a text with a leader. And we're going to reference off the center mark over here. Actually, we'll reference off the hole. We're going to drag a text box down. And we're going to type in our counterbore hole dimensions now. There are 4 counterbore holes, so I'm going to type in 4x. They all have a diameter, so I'm going to type in the diameter of the counterbore. Oops. Sorry. We're going to type the counterbore symbol, then the diameter symbol, and they all have a diameter of 380 thousandths with a 80 thousandths depth on them. I'm going to hit Shift Enter, and then the diameter of the hole, so I'm going to type in hole. The diameter symbol is going to be 260 thousandths, and that one goes all the way through the part. This is a good time to kind of observe your drawing, double check, make sure everything looks good. The purpose of a drawing is so you can hand off your drawing to somebody so they can actually make it. You want to make sure that all your measurements are clear and for anybody to understand. Before we finish this tutorial, we're going to jump down to our title block and update our title block. We're going to double click on the frame of our title block and go down to material. The material that this is supposed to be made out of is 6061 T6 aluminum. And then this will be revision A for our drawing. And then press OK. Other than that, this drawing looks pretty well defined. And this concludes our tutorial on how to create a drawing in Fusion 360.